Hi everyone, I am the voice and the author behind that podcast. You have probably noticed that both here in the podcast and on my YouTube channel, we had a very long recording of me rambling about a lot of things in Bulgarian. I need to explain to you that the video was in Bulgarian because I really needed to explain to Bulgarian readers why the podcast had been quiet for probably more than a year. And there are several reasons behind that. I'll go into detail about most of them, but I needed to start with the Bulgarian readers and listeners in our case, because this podcast and the YouTube channel with it are mainly in Bulgarian, so I need to explain to my Bulgarian audience first. But for those of you who are here and you speak English, I decided to create a second video and explain probably a bit briefer on why it all happened. So, to start off, I will need to tell you a story that starts in 2021. That's when this podcast was started. I must admit, it was an experiment. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just started recording to check if anyone would listen to me, if anyone would like listening to me reading out things. Then it started getting fun. I started recording in bulk because I wanted to have a lot of backlog in order to be able to publish more things for a longer period of time. It was 2021, so no one knew when the pandemic would end. So we were expecting it to end by autumn. It didn't, obviously, but I didn't know that. So I was pushing myself to create a lot of content in a very short period of time. That wasn't exactly the best of things. I must admit that back then I used a totally different microphone than now. This one should be better. So there is a lot of content both in English and Bulgarian that has been recorded in 2021, and you haven't even seen that. And the reason behind you not seeing it is that when I started, it was an experiment. I had zero idea that publishing a podcast episode and getting people listen to it are two shockingly different things. I didn't really know those were different. So I needed to learn from scratch on how to actually create an episode. Believe me, I do not edit those. I just talk and upload. I'm talking and uploading. I'm editing them much more for YouTube, so I'm adding pictures, I'm adding a soundtrack, but on my podcast, it's usually me talking, no background sounds, I hope. So I really needed to learn how to do things, and it turned out that it's way more complicated than I thought, and it led to me getting overwhelmed and tired at the end of 2021, and I had a lot of other things to tackle, but more on that later on in this audio recording. My initial idea was to make it short and sweet, but since I love rambling, you'll listen to me for quite some time. But anyway, so let me continue with a very interesting thing that happened to me. So I didn't really know even how to create a design for a podcast episode. Believe me, I discovered that last year. So when I started, it was just me reading out things. It was fun, I must admit, but I got so tired at the end of 21 that I needed to stop. The second reason I needed to stop was the war in Ukraine. Because you probably don't know because you speak English, but like 70% of this podcast content is actually me reading out the longest story I have ever created. And this story is actually based on a urban fantasy series by a Russian author. What is more is that the characters in my story are Russian, and that the story takes place in Moscow 20 years ago. So when the war in Ukraine started, I didn't think it was ethical for me to post something like that. Even though it was fiction, even though it takes place like 20 years ago, even though it has nothing to do with politics, it's an urban fantasy story, I just didn't feel it was the right thing to do. So basically what I did was to stop all activity on that story, which meant that no new podcast episodes were going, no new YouTube videos were going, no new chapters were being published on my Facebook page, Instagram, or in the story blog. It all went silent out of respect for the lives people were losing out there. It took me I think 9 or 10 months to make up my mind on what I'm going to do about the story. And I really wanted to hear what my readers have to say about that, and they were in for me keeping it. Which is why at the very end of 2022 I started reposting some of the stories, but more on that later. So that was one of the reasons the podcast went silent, and the other reasons are kind of personal and actually connected to my other activities. But in case you haven't noticed or you have zero idea and this is the first audio you're listening from me, my name is Bistra. I am an author, a translator and interpreter, and a photographer. So this podcast is not my main activity. It's not a source of income yet. I'm doing it in order to popularize my writing mainly. So it started as a byproduct of my writing because I've been told that I have a nice voice. I wanted to test this out and see how something I read would sound. People started listening to it, and later on I decided to include English as well. Because, there are a few people that speak Bulgarian, but the majority of people on earth actually have some level of English knowledge, so I decided that some English things would probably be useful. But anyway, that was just a digression on my side on why this thing exists. And the reason why I needed to stop in 21 was that I had my first book published. It's a true crime story. It's based on real events. It's a thriller about the story of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Fron, who went missing in the Panama jungle. You can find a lot of videos on those two girls, and I have my theory on what happened to them. So when I published my book, I realized that publishing it on paper and selling it are two absolutely different things, and I was not prepared for that. All those Hallmark movies teach us that you write a manuscript, then all publishing houses want to publish you traditionally, so you don't really pay anything. Then you have thousands of readers and thousands of fans, and all you do is sign books. Well, it doesn't happen like that. And I didn't really know that. I didn't really know to what extent people would congratulate you and lie to you that they're going to buy the book, and they're not going to. And that was a huge disappointment when the first book was out. I currently have two. So it took me some time to learn some marketing and to process the information that actually, yes, people are buying the books, but you as the author, as the person who writes them, should also be out there in some form. So as a photographer, I'm used to being behind the lens, which means that I don't really like taking pictures of myself. I'm not that type of person. I'm okay with speaking in public though. I'm totally okay with public speaking. I'm okay with recording things like that. And I'm okay with loads of other things, but I'm not really okay with those bimbo looking pictures, I ate this, I went there, I did this and this and that. This is not my thing at all. And I prefer to be my face, at least, to be out of the spotlight. And it took me a lot of time and a lot of processing to realize that if I don't share bits and pieces about myself, people don't really have an idea who's on the other end of the book. So that was a learning curve. I needed to learn design, I needed to learn marketing. I'm still learning, by the way, but that was the main focus of 21 and some parts of 22, because I needed to find a way to sell the book. And it was tough. I learned a lot, though. There was another thing that it was not a disaster, but it was something that made me rethink my priorities, made me realize who I was and what I was standing for, and that happened at the beginning of 22. And that was thanks to a group of toxic writers. I basically almost quit writing altogether. It was then, it was a very tough moment for me. It was then that I had an idea of writing down my bits and pieces and tips about writing. So it's not like I'm teaching people how to write. It's basically I'm trying to help people not lose their mind if they had started writing for some reason. This book is going to be published probably next year, but this is the first announcement I want to make because it would be probably, at least in parts, in English. So I'll be sharing my experience as a writer. Some of those episodes are already recorded. Some of them will be recorded because I'll make a point to record them. But I'll be trying to tell you that on the other end of the microphone and on the other end of any book, there is a person who is frustrated, who is insecure most of the time, and who really, really, really wants someone to read them. So I'm gonna share some tips. I'm not going to tell you how to write better because first of all, it's not my job. And second of all, you have your own styles. But this is something that concerns you as English speakers listening to this podcast. There is a chance that I'll be appearing on camera for the YouTube channel, but currently I don't really feel comfortable with that. I'm planning to do that when my next books come out, but for the time being, I'll stay away from the camera, at least for English-speaking videos. I have promised my Bulgarian listeners that I'll be on camera at some point. For Bulgarian speakers who happen to listen to this, guys, there will be a lot of content in Bulgarian, trust me, loads of it coming. And another nice thing is that Различен следовател, which is the long story I needed to stop, this one is getting out, getting printed on paper, and it will be out very soon. By very soon, I mean like in a week. So I'll have 3 more books. I'll be an author of 5 published books, not 2, 5. It sounds amazing. Can't even believe that. So I'll be talking a lot about my journey on those 3 books because basically they made me a writer. A writer in the sense of skills and a writer in the sense of mentality, let's say. So I'll be explaining a lot of those. I already explained to the Bulgarian listeners in the other audio, the other recording, or the other video if you're watching the YouTube channel. So if you have just come to this thing, go to the previous one. And there you'll find everything in Bulgarian. If you're okay with listening to this, fine, but the content is a little bit different because English speakers probably don't give a damn about things that are in Bulgarian and are not going to get translated into English soon. So there I go into details about that story, which is going out on paper now. So here I'll be going in details about the things that will be in English. So the first one will be writing tips. I know that a lot of people do that. So probably some of the writing tips will be both in English and in Bulgarian because I'll get more audience because of that. But most of them will be in Bulgarian because the English-speaking world and Bulgaria have different publishing rules. So my experience so far has been mostly with the Bulgarian publishing world. I plan to venture into publishing English content, English language content, but that would be at a later stage because I first need to finish those. More on that in just a bit. So the second change happened at the mid 2022. In fact, it was just at the same time as I'm recording this video, and I had a burnout. Thanks to my shitty job, I had a burnout so severe that I was in a gray area. I wasn't even the person I know. I mean, I literally looked at myself in the mirror and was like, who are you? Everything was gray. I didn't really want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything except play stupid games on my phone. That was a very severe episode. I needed to research what was going on with me, why it happened, and how to get back, because it was really, really the worst case of burnout I have had. And believe me, I've had like 4. No, let's count them to 3, because 3 were the ones I realized that they were burnouts. I think I had more, but that was at a time when burnout was not exactly the vibe. So I heard that people with the same mental state usually go and seek a psychologist. I managed to cope on my own and recover for 6 months, and I'm actually proud of that. But during those 6 months, I started recording my experience, and this is how a book of mine was created, and that's probably one of the first self-help books, because my book with writing advice would be mostly about writers, not exactly self-help thing. But this one about burnout is the first about self-help, and it would probably be the first book in English I intend to publish. So for English speakers, this will be probably the most of the content you'll have the opportunity to listen to in this podcast and in the YouTube channel. I started recording my experience just to make sense of it, but as time progressed and the events at my job at that point also progressed, because let's say that 30 or to 40% of the blame for my burnout could be placed directly on the company I was working for. So as things escalated there, I was driven to the point of a second burnout in February this year. I'm sorry about the or things. I'm trying to phrase things that have been going on in my head for months, and I'm not really sure how to phrase them and still be politically correct, because believe me, when I'm talking about those events, there are very few things that I can say that could be polite. I have a lot of things to say. Most of them are not polite at all. I'm not going to provide details on the company I worked for, but I will be providing you with some details on what type of behavior pushed me into the abyss of burnout. And I'll be very specific, because if I'm not specific, you will probably think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not, believe me. I will explain in that book on what happened to me, why it happened to me, and how you can get out at this point, what are the steps to get out, and how to prevent it, because there is a way to prevent it, and unfortunately I learned about that way too late. So I needed to work my way back from the abyss, climb out of the hole I was in, and then start building upwards. So I was so stuck, I was so run down mentally, that I wasn't even at ground zero. I was below zero, way below zero. So I'll be sharing my experience. I'll probably be sharing my experience as blog posts on Medium. I already started that, but I'll probably edit the episodes because there are new events. So officially, my initial idea of my burnout record. Sorry about that. I meant my recording of my burnout episode. My initial idea was to just stop at the moment when I felt roughly okay, which was February 2023. But unfortunately, that same month, I had almost the same situation as the one that pushed me into burnout the previous year. So I decided, being faced with a fourth, even worse burnout, that this company is no longer worth the nerves. They do not value me at all. So I resigned. I just quit. And it took me 6 full months to recover. And throughout those months, I also learned other things about myself, about who I was, what I wanted, and what has happened to me. Believe it or not, I didn't even realize how much they had affected me. I mean, how toxic the whole thing had been, and how much it was all a mess, really. So basically, I needed to learn to live again. And right now, I feel okay. I feel as well as I had felt like 10 years ago, which is a huge breakthrough. So I have hopes, I have plans, I am happy. I kind of feel tired from time to time, but it's not exactly the same thing as being exhausted all the time. So I must admit that it's not even close to what it used to be. So I'm gonna include that as well in the whole narrative about burnout. And I hope it will serve you at some point, because it is rampant. It is an epidemic, and it should stop. And it's not always the employee who is to blame. It is shitty company culture that creates it, and shitty societal standards. So we'll talk a lot about that. It will be mostly in English because I want this to reach out to as many people as possible. I really, really want that my story would serve as an example and would help people. Because yes, it happened to me, but it doesn't need to happen to you to learn those lessons. On the contrary, when I started researching burnout, I wish more people would tell me what to do. And there was nothing. I was basically reinventing the wheel. And it was absurd. Because all the advice I had was go with something creative. Well, guess what? I was already doing creative work as a job. So creativity was not an option. Because let me paint the picture to you. So I was working full-time for that company X, which I'm not going to name, let's say. So I was working full-time. In the meantime, I had 3 creative jobs. So I was doing photography gigs. I was also doing writing. So I had my books to promote. At the time of the burnout, I had already 2 published books and I needed to promote them. And I was writing the 3rd one, which thanks to that whole episode of burnout is not yet finished. Well, thank you for your consideration, as Katniss Everdeen says. So at that point, things were really tough. Other types of creativity would also not do because I am into drawing. In fact, I'm actually doing the illustrations of my upcoming books, the ones that are just going out of print. So it didn't really work. So you can't really cure burnout with something that had cured the previous episode and now it's no longer effective. So I wish I had more stories like mine to work with when I started, and which is one of the reasons I want to tell my story. Because if I stay silent, this would continue. And it's not about this company that caused it or helped me get into burnout mode. It's about any company or any person who just wants to be effective and is a perfectionist or wants to do things right and is underappreciated. So it's all about that. This thing and my journey in and out of burnout was actually the reason why I would probably be including some self-help and motivational episodes for you, and they will probably be mainly in English as well, because I want more people to learn about that. I may not be a guru of some kind, but I think I can help, because I have very interesting stories to share with you. Some of them are writer related, but most of them are not. So you'll see how little things could actually lead to huge changes. So those would be English things. The other changes would be mostly in Bulgarian, but you know which episodes to follow, I guess. Obviously, when the title is in English, the episode is probably in English. So those will be the new ones. I'll also be uploading the episodes which I recorded like 2 years ago in 2021. I will be recording more comments on that. I will try to be consistent this time, but I really can't say at this point which kind of thing would get published first. I just need to tell you that there would be some kind of a backlog because we need to catch up on Instagram. I'm trying to promote my podcast there as well, so we need to share the episodes that are currently out before being able to publish something else, because there's no use for me to publish those and then go back. It's really, really annoying for me. So we'll see what happens. I must say that those 2 years I was silent were transformational, so I am totally not the same person I was in 2021, and I'm grateful for that. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I really am, because I feel much better, much calmer, and much more balanced than I was in 2021, and I think I'm doing things better than I used to do them now. But I will totally be here, be around. I'll try to create as many audio recordings as I can, because it is important to me. I want to keep on that podcast. I want to keep the YouTube channel. And let's hope that things will get better from now on. And let's hope that I'll see you in the next video. So fun thing is that the Bulgarian language video is only 2 minutes longer than this one. So it's like a half an hour video, and this is like 28 minutes. So basically I must have said almost the same things. So thank you so much for being here with me, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.